right, the stabilizers. So this is really interesting when I'm actually doing these as a live presentation or a live training. When we get to the stabilizer, it fascinates me. It can be in the biggest room and the room will go quite quiet and quite focused. Everyone, even the eyes shut up, which is amazing. And so the stabilizers are a fascinating group of people. I really like, in fact, everyone really likes them. The Ds may get a bit frustrated because they won't, step out, but no, everyone really loves them. These are beautiful, tend to be beautiful people that are very loyal, that are very organized, just not the most assertive. In fact, we're now looking at the last two letters, so we're at S or stabilizer or steady, and that kind of tells you a little bit about their behavioral style. And so these folk are relational, so they care about people, but they're more reserved, they're poised to action. They're going to take time to think through things and process stuff. And they need frameworks and they need certain things for kind of their world to work well. And so the stabilizers bring an incredible calming, an incredible strength, like a real grounded strength to a team. These are the folks that we often find them in support positions just because of the nature of who they are. Although when they do step into leadership, they're unbelievable leaders, like really good leaders. Because what they carry is an incredible capacity to listen. They carry the same empathy that the Is do. They carry a desire for teams to win, they're not about themselves. And so there's a lot about them. They're very much that team player. They're quite deliberate in their actions, and they really think through and organize themselves, and are quite okay having someone bring input and say, this is how I want you to be organized, okay? And so I always say, when you're giving instructions to an S, you give them here's where we're at, here's where I need to be, and allow them to organize everything else. So long as they've got the skills and the capacity to do that, they will just do it. They'll do it faithfully. You don't have to watch over their shoulder. They're incredible. So the S's just hear things, observe things, see things that the rest of us don't see. Interestingly enough, often I recommend, like particularly if you're going to like a client meeting or a sales meeting or whatever, take one of the S's along with you. Don't freak them out because they'll think, what, have I got to sell now? No. Just let them sit there. Introduce them. I'll say something if they feel like they need to or can, but they will hear things in that meeting that you will never hear if you're a D or an I in particular, but even a C. They will hear things you never hear. And so they have this incredible ability to listen, to connect. They're very cooperative in the way they operate. And so that's where they get that whole idea of being the stabilizer or being the steady influence. And so when we start to look at that and we start to think about, well, what is that stabilizer? What are some of their challenges? Well, we'll get to those in a minute, but you can start to already see it, right? So they tend to not put themselves forward. They tend to be terrified of conflict. They tend to not want to do any public speaking or anything at all. One of the things I discovered early on, working with a client, she was an I, she loved celebrating, and she said, every time I celebrate, my team gets worse. And so I said, well, we profiled them, found out they were all S's, and she was putting them on a pedestal. Well, they hate that, right? They want to be congratulated, they want to be rewarded, but in private or very briefly in public. So just a couple of things to think about there. These are the guys that really bring so much foundational strength to a team. So let's think about how they handle, how they handle pace, how they handle consistency, and all those sorts of things. So somebody who is high in S is going to prefer a slower paced environment. They're going to really struggle if you're constantly moving things around, constantly changing, constantly coming up with new ideas and saying, hey, I want you to do this now, I want you to do this now, and they can't finish the last task. You've got to be very predictable, be very calm, be very organized around them. Okay, so watch that your pace is steady, watch that your environment is stable. If you're in one of those businesses where it's all over the place, you're probably not attracting the S anyway, but it's good to know. But then again, maybe some of these guys can bring some of that steadiness that you need. And so, but they need a consistent environment. Their strengths, as we've already talked about, quite cooperative. They're very much a team player. In fact, their whole success is built around a team win, not an individual win. And so, they're friendly, they're patient, they're great listeners, the best of all four of these types, and quite supportive. So obviously, even the S's have a shadow side. And so that's just how it is. So when we start to look at the shadow side of an S, so S's really struggle with sudden change. In fact, they struggle with change at all, but they're resistant to sudden change is sometimes it limits a business. They tend to be way too lenient, right? So when I say lenient, often because of their nature, they're very friendly, they're very agreeable. And so what will happen is, they'll become like the dumping ground for everybody's problems because they're just so nice. They listen. Some of them are smart enough to go, hey, I need to get my work done now. But they are nice, and they tend to attract people to come and talk about their problems and do things. And so, but even as leaders, because they want to avoid conflict, they will tend to allow things to happen. These are the ones when we talk about in conflict, it's more about what we tolerate than what we actually deliberately do wrong as leaders. These are the guys that often tolerate something in the name of, well, maybe it'll get better. I don't really want to confront that. I don't like conflict. I don't want to destabilize the team. I don't want someone to feel sad or whatever it might be. And so being too lenient. It's interesting because this group can get quite possessive of their space. That's part of the nature of who they are. And so a lot of that's just protecting themselves. So we also see a lot of timidity. They'll be quite quiet. And of course, like a dominant or an influencer who are the more assertive characters might see that as weak, but it's a very underlying kind of behavior. But there is an element of these guys can become complacent in their world, okay? Because it's just easy. They would rather things just stay the same. Things never change, all those sorts of things. So that's the stabilizer, just having a quick look at that, or steady, depending on which disc you're looking at. The next one and the final in the group of four, we're going to look at the controller or the conscientious person.